What's going on, everybody? Welcome to this edition of Afterthoughts, recapping UFC Boston, headlined by one of the stranger main events the promotions put on in 2019. We had Chris Weidman fighting Dominic Reyes in a light heavyweight main event, lauded by some as being a title eliminator fight. I didn't really agree with that statement until the fight played out, and I realized Dominic Reyes was a lot better than I thought. And not only was he a lot better than I thought, he reminded me of the Dominic Reyes that we saw when he entered the UFC back in I believe it was 2017 he made his debut. It was a short performance, not really a lot to take away from it, other than the fact that it was clinical. In every aspect of the game, Reyes showed incredible improvements and incredible grit, and he just looked fantastic. He looked like he looked when he first came into the UFC. He looked like a contender that can challenge for a title now. You know, his last couple of fights, he looked really good against Ovince St. Preux, but was tested quite a bit in that fight. Then when he fights Volkan Oezdemir, arguably loses that fight. He ended up getting the decision, of course, but very controversial. I think the vast majority of people scored it for Oezdemir. So this was a performance that I anticipated. I picked Weidman to win via first round knockout, but I thought that was more on the line of I didn't think Weidman had it in him anymore, less so that I think Reyes was a top-notch contender. But after watching what he did, the way he did it, he's very technically sound. He obviously carries a lot of power. He's a finisher. He's undefeated. He needs to fight Jon Jones next. That's the only fight that makes sense for him. That fight solidified that. I think, now granted, Weidman, former middleweight, a guy who's lost quite a bit. I think now, last night was 4 out of his last 5 that he's lost. So, Weidman's a guy who has not been, on that level that he has been in the past. He's definitely not championship level anymore. But Weidman's a guy that, that obviously carries a lot of name value. And he does bring a lot of toughness, and his skill set, his ground game, his wrestling, his jiu-jitsu, are all phenomenal aspects of his game. And they could definitely test somebody who's never been brought into that water before. Like Reyes had never faced a grappler like Weidman before. But he gets this win, and he looked fantastic in every facet of the game. Weidman takes him down, he gets back up. Cardio's not shot. He's able to fend off the clinch, and he's able to get a clean knockout moving backwards. Reyes is the guy. He's the guy who deserves that fight with Jon Jones next. I think it'd be a fantastic fight. I would lean Jon quite a bit preliminarily, but of course that's why we have these fights, because we get to speculate and then we get to actually see it play out. So it'll be fun to see, but I definitely think Reyes should get that fight with Jon Jones next. Now, as for Chris Weidman, really, I'm at a loss for words with him, because I don't really know what to say for Weidman. He's the former middleweight champion. He obviously has had a lot of success at middleweight. But lately, and when I say lately, I mean the last 3 or 4 years, that luster and that championship medal that he once had is gone. And I don't know what to say about him anymore. I'm at a loss for words with him, because he is a gatekeeper, I guess, technically. Reyes wins this fight, now he, in theory, gets a title shot. He is that name that guys can build off of. But he's almost not even that level anymore. I feel like with Weidman, he's one of those guys who now you put against unranked middleweights or light heavyweights, and you see if they can maybe build off of him. Because every fight he's been in, even the one that he won against Kelvin Gastelum in 2017, he got rocked in that fight. he's just not the same anymore. And I think when I look at Weidman, um, I really don't know what to say about him. You know, I don't like making recommendations that guys should retire, but what else does he need to prove? He's a former champion. He has achieved a lot of success in the sport. He's the only man to beat Anderson Silva twice. Um, I think if you're Chris Weidman, you really need to look in the mirror and make a decision on what you want to do going forward. Because right now, there's no place for him. You know, he's still ranked at middleweight, but he's a guy that, you know, if you give him a ranked middleweight, more than likely he's the underdog and he loses. He's more of a guy that you have to put against unranked guys now. And if I'm Chris Weidman, I look at that and I say, maybe it's time for me to call it quits. Maybe this isn't for me anymore. So it's an unfortunate set of circumstances for Weidman, but it's the nature of this game, and you know, and I think if he were to hang him up, you know, the guy accomplished quite a bit in the sport. Again, only guy to beat Anderson Silva twice, former middleweight champion, defended the title 3 times. You know, fought in an era when middleweight was arguably the best division in the sport. So I think Chris Weidman really needs to evaluate his options here, because there really isn't much to say about him right now. There really isn't much for him going forward either. I think he's in a position where it might benefit him to call it quits. Moving on down the card, the most intriguing fight of the card, undoubtedly, Yair Rodriguez and Jeremy Stephens. Obviously, you know, we know the history, the eye poke, you know, we know all that. But the fight, it didn't really play out the way I expected it to. I thought it was going to be on the feet the entire time. I think that's what the vast majority of people thought. We've never really seen Jeremy Stephens wrestle, and you know, we haven't really seen Yair Rodriguez's ground game. So the idea was this will be a stand-up war. Someone's going to get tagged, and that'll be it. You know, we saw Jeremy Stephens get staggered a few times on the feet, that big body shot in the second round. He was able to survive, of course, ends up going to a decision. Rodriguez wins. That's another one where I look at it and I don't really take too much away from it. From Yair's side, I still don't think I still need to see more to be bought on him as a contender. I have not seen enough from him yet. You know, the Korean Zombie win was, I mean, let's just call it what it was. It was a fluke. You know, 99% of the time that doesn't happen. So, you know, it's one of those things where he hasn't really beaten an elite contender yet. Stephens is always one of those mid-ranked guys. He's not really been a top-notch contender. Korean Zombie's starting to make a run, but again, you know, 99% of the time he doesn't win that fight. So, I'm not really sold on Yair yet. Maybe a fight with a guy like a Josh Emmett, if he's able to get past him, I could then buy into it a little bit more. But you know, there was a guy at the post-fight press conference calling for a fight between Yair and Max Holloway. Absolutely not. No, he's not at that level yet. He needs to get at least 2 more top 10 wins before he even gets mentioned in a title conversation. But I still want to see him fight another top-notch contender, because I'm not particularly sold on him just yet. He looked great early in that fight, but as the fight wore on, Stephens was definitely gaining an edge. And if that fight had been 5 rounds, I think Stephens very well would have won that fight. So we'll see what happens with Yair Rodriguez going forward, but I still want to see a little bit more from him. For Jeremy Stephens, this was what solidified him as a gatekeeper. He's not going to be a guy who's going to fight for a title. He's struggled in these bigger fights against these higher ranked guys. Stephens is locked into position, I think. I think he's always going to be in that like 8 to 12 range. He's always going to be a guy that guys fighting up in the rankings can build their name off of. But I think he's solidified as a gatekeeper. Fun guy to watch. Always going to bring a fight. Always going to be exciting. But he's a gatekeeper, and that's set in stone. Going to talk about Greg Hardy briefly. I think Greg Hardy's wickedly talented. I think he's a very, very bright prospect. But the only thing that's going to keep him from succeeding in this sport is himself and his own foolishness. Because, I mean, that fight with Sassoli, that was a fight he was going to win. That was a fight he should have won. It was a fight he did win until it got overturned, rightfully so. The inhaler thing. honestly, with Greg Hardy, you know, we know about his past. We know the decisions he's made in the past have not been great decisions, of course. You know, I don't think he's a very smart guy, to be perfectly honest with you. But he's a hell of a fighter, and if he can get out of his own way, I think he can really have success in this sport. But goodness gracious, I mean, his 2 losses have been a DQ from an illegal knee, and he used an inhaler in the corner, which has never been allowed in this sport. I remember when King Mo did it in Strikeforce, and it was a big deal then, back in like 2011, whenever that was. So, I mean, it's one of those things where Greg Hardy, he just like I'll blame the corner and I'll blame him, and you know the commission. Okay, honestly, it's a really crazy situation. Everyone is to blame for that, but really, I'm gonna blame Hardy in the corner because, like, you guys should know better. Seriously, ATT is the biggest gym in the world. Dean Thomas is a great coach. Come on, guys. Seriously, like they should know better than that. So Hardy can be good, but he's just got to get out of his own way. And then I'm going to close out with Maycee Barber, and Maycee Barber is huge for that weight class, number 1. But she's also incredibly technical. I'm not just going to say it's size that's doing it, because she carries a lot of technique. Her striking game is really crisp. And I think Maycee Barber... I'm catching a little bit of lag here. That was weird. But I think Maycee Barber is going to keep winning. Flyweight's very shallow. There isn't really very many contenders. Like right now off the top of my head, I think Viviane Araujo is probably the biggest contender to Valentina at the moment. But I think Maycee, what's going to happen with her is she's going to keep on winning. She's going to keep beating these, you know, these ladies who are kind of past their prime or kind of on the way out. And she's gonna get that title fight. I think she keeps winning until she fights Valentina Shevchenko, and then I think Valentina outclasses her everywhere. I think Valentina is at such a higher level than all of these girls at this weight class, and I think, and I just think what's gonna happen is Maycee's gonna keep winning because I think she is more technically sound than the vast majority of these flyweights. But Valentina, I think when she gets to that title fight with Valentina, that's when she's going to finally lose. But Maycee Barber, I'm very impressed with her, and I can't wait to see what happens with her going forward. I hope she doesn't fight Paige Van Zandt. That's a terrible fight. It's a mismatch. She beats Paige everywhere that fight takes place. I'd like to see her fight maybe a Liz Carmouche, somebody like that, somebody who is a big contender in that division, and somebody that's going to present her with a lot of problems she hasn't seen before. Someone who's a really high-level grappler, somebody who can really test Maycee to make sure she is at that, you know, that she's about to hit that championship level, and that she has what it takes to step in there with Valentina. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching this edition of Afterthoughts. Tune in next time. I am Johann Castro. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.